About 10 years ago, I started teaching myself how to make music through the world of EDM. And even though this was years before I gave my life to Jesus, there's a bird. Even though this was years before I gave my life to Jesus, I was still very much in the context of playing drums for the church. I was playing for praise teams. And so I was naturally very interested in one particular sound, that was the worship drum sound. I mean, it just sounded massive. The kick was thunderous. The snare had this gushy punch. The toms were roaring. The cymbals, they weren't articulate at all. They had this washy presence to it. And so I like a little bit of challenge, like a little bit of inspiration. So I decided I'm gonna take my jab at recording worship drums. And so I gathered what resources I had, found a drum kit. I borrowed my church mic kit. My friend let me use his Istanbuls, and he came along with his 8-channel interface. And so we set everything up, and we decided, let's try recording some drums. It sounded horrible. Everything about it just sounded bad. The kick was all click with no bottom end. The snare sounded like I was sitting on a cardboard box. Toms were flubby. No amount of finessing with plugins just made it sound any better. I was pretty discouraged. So I just decided I'm gonna throw in the towel, just stick to making electronic music. That is until I started working at Starbucks. I don't know what got into me. I just started spending every cent I made from work into acquiring gear. Got my first drum set back in 2019. My Rogers holiday kit from the 60s for $1,000. Then I bought my first set of cymbals. Then I started buying microphones, a lot of microphones. Then I got my first interface with 8 channels of preamps. And so I started to experiment a lot. Different recording techniques, different mic arrangements, different tunings. So I'm making this video to show you the things that I've learned over the years of just countless hours of watching gear rundown videos, many hours of experimenting and failing, the countless drum recording sessions that ended up sounding like poo-poo. And my hope and challenge to you is that you would pull together the resources that you have already and just go out there and experiment. This video will be broken down into 2 main parts. The first portion will be about the gear that I use, everything you need to know about how to record the drums, from the mic choices to mic setups, what kind of drums I use and whatnot. And the second portion will be on how to mix the recorded audio. The timestamps and the chapters will be available down below, and so feel free to just navigate through the different sections. So let me first talk to you about the most important thing when it comes to getting that worship drum tone. And it's the drums. Surprise. Not a lot of people talk about this, or at least I don't think it's talked about enough, but if your drums sound bad to your ears, it's gonna sound bad through the microphones. Most of what makes up that sound comes from the drums themselves and how you tune them. So it's really important that you understand your gear, what type of heads to use, what type of cymbals give you the sound that you want, and how best to utilize what you have. So this is a Dayton era Rogers holiday kit from the late 1960s, and I found this kit on eBay for $1,000. You could probably find one used right now for around $1,200, $1,300, depending on the configuration. The key, I would say, is the dimensions of the drums and the type of heads that you put on them and how you tune them. Starting with the kick, it's a 22 by 14, and then the high tom is a 13 by 9. The low tom is a 16 by 16. Those dimensions alone already will give you a big thumpy sound. And then for the drum heads, I'm rocking the Remo Power Stroke 4s usually on the batter and Ambassador Clear on the Rezo side. Right now I have an Ambassador on my high tom and an Emperor on my low tom. I don't know what the Evans equivalent of that would be, but just anything 2-ply, anything 2-ply. Then I have an Evans EMAD 2 on the kick drum and a Remo Fiber Skin Ambassador on the Rezo side. I tried a bunch of different kick drum heads, and by far, EMAD 2 was the thumpiest. It just has that punch. It's very controlled. The snare drum that I have on right now is the Ludwig Bronze Superphonic. It's a 14 by 6.5. And I also have a Black Beauty 14 by 8 for that classic deep Bethel-y snare sound. And again, normally I would have a Power Stroke 4 coated on the batter side and an Ambassador Clear on the Rezo side, but I was working on something else. I wanted a bit of a thinner drum head, so right now I have an Emperor on there. It still sounds great, still sounds great. And moving on to the cymbals, I'm currently rocking the 10th anniversary from Heartbeats, the crash cymbal being 22 inches and the ride cymbal being 24. And then the hi-hats, I'm using the Holy Grail from Cymbal and Gong. It's 15 inches. And for the microphones, right now I'm using an 8 microphone setup with kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, 2 toms, and 2 overheads. For the 2 overheads, I'm using the AKG C414s. It's just a workhorse of a microphone. I could put that thing in front of anything. It'll sound great. I've used it on vocals, used it on acoustic guitars, used it on toms, used it on electric guitar, I've used it on snare bottom. You can put it on anything. Sounds great. Then moving on to the close mics, right now I'm using a pair of Sennheiser MD421s for the toms, versatile dynamic microphones. I use them for my main vocals, for live, and also for my worship covers. Then I'm using the good old faithful Shure SM57s, a pair of them for top and bottom of the snare. And for the kick drum, I'm using an Electro Voice RE20 for the inside, and a Audio-Technica 4047 for the outside, and that's a condenser microphone, so I gotta place it a little bit further away just so I can avoid internal clipping. Again, it's a condenser microphone, so it's a little bit more sensitive than your normal dynamic microphones. And finally, all of that runs into my interface. It's the Universal Audio Apollo 8P. This is what brings all that analog signal into the digital realm, into my computer. It's a great interface. I just like the ecosystem and the plugins that come with it. And so I'm using the Apollo 8P, but there's plenty of other cheaper options out there. Now, when it comes to miking up your drums, there's a lot of different techniques out there. There's the Glyn Johns, which is more of a minimal setup with 3 to 4 microphones. And then there's different configurations of stereo pairs. I just keep things simple. I just do a spaced pair of stereo microphones with close mics and then kick out. And then sometimes if you have a nice big room with good acoustics in it that complement your drum tone, you can put up a pair of room mics, and there you can do different stereo configurations that best suit that acoustic space. But for me, I have a pretty small room, as you can see, so I just keep things simple. Now, starting with the overheads, I'm not going to overcomplicate the process. I just grab an extra cable, and I just make sure that the 2 microphones are equidistant from the center of my snare drum. And that's to prevent any kind of phasing issues. Basically, you just want the sound waves coming off the snare drum to reach both of your overhead microphones at the same time. Moving on to the close mics. The most important thing about setting up your close mics is understanding how axis and proximity affect the tone of your recording. The closer your microphone moves towards the source, the warmer, for lack of a better term, your sound gets, and the further away you move your microphone from the source, the colder it gets, and that's called the proximity effect. And it's also important to know where you point your microphone. So I just pretend there's a laser shooting out of my microphone, and depending on where that laser lands on my drum surface, that's going to affect the tone of your recording as well. The closer you are to the center of the head, you're going to get more attack. And the closer you point it towards the edge of the drum head, you're going to get a lot more tone, but less attack. You'll hear more hum. So I'm gonna point somewhere in the middle between the center and the edge of the drum, so I get both a little bit of attack and also a little bit of tone. For the kick drum, I'm applying the same set of principles. For the inside kick drum, I'm not going to point it directly at the beater. Again, like I said, I want a little bit of tone, a little bit of attack, so I'm going to point somewhere in between the edge and the beater. And also for my outside kick mic, I want to go somewhere in between middle and the edge. That's the resonance of the kick drum. It's where the boom comes from, and so it's actually a very important part of my setup. Once all my microphones are set up, it's all going into my interface, and I'm just making sure that each channel is getting a healthy level of input, just making sure things aren't clipping. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth about how to tune your drums, but I do want to share with you some general principles that I go by when I tune my drums. First off, tune bots. It's a great tool, and I don't really use them anymore. I think it's great if you're in the context of you playing a lot of different places and you just want consistency all the time. It's great. You can get real surgical with this one. Essentially, what it taught me was to have the patience to make sure each lug is singing the same pitch. After you do it enough times, you start to get a hang of it. And one neat little trick is if you put your finger down in the center of your head, just a little bit, apply a little bit of pressure, and when you hit when you tap the edge of your drum heads, you'll be able to hear the pitch a lot clearer. So here's my general principle for tuning drums. You just want to tune your reso side a bit higher than your batter side. For my toms, I tune my reso side until I can hear a distinct pitch on the reso side, and then I tune my batter side to taste. For the snare, the reso side is going to be higher in pitch, but it's actually going to be a lot higher in pitch. Sometimes it's almost tabletop hard when you tap on it, and then again you tune the batter side to taste. The reso side ends up somewhere between 360 hertz to 400 hertz, and the batter side, it's been a long time since I've checked, but somewhere around 200 is a good range for medium tuning. For the kick drum, I tune the reso side until I can hear somewhat of a distinct pitch, and then the batter side, I tune it low enough where I know it's thumpy. So being able to tune your drums well, just like any other thing, it's a skill set that you need to practice to get better. And it's a very important skill set that you need as a drummer and as an engineer. What does it matter if you have a $3,000 drum kit right in front of you if you don't know how to tune it well and it sounds horrible because you put the wrong type of heads and you don't know how to tune it? So you've done your research on what gear to use for recording your drums and what type of drum heads to use and what drums, cymbals make things sound good, and you've got things recorded. How can we make things sound good? Here's my general flow of thought when I'm approaching mixing drums. First off, gain staging, so that each channel is hitting the first plug-in at a healthy level. Then I'm setting levels. I'm worrying about the interbalance or the sub-mix. So how loud is the kick compared to the snare? How loud is the snare compared to the toms? And etc. Then I'm going into an expander or a gate then I'm EQing things, then I'm compressing things, then I'm saturating things, and then I'm putting on reverb on some things, and then I'm doing bus processing, which is where really the magic is happening. Really, half of the sound comes from everything before the bus mix, and then the other half comes from the bus mix. So let's get into it, see what we can do with the drum sound that we recorded. Okay, so I have prepped the multi-tracks from the little intro clip, and we're ready to dive in and mix the drums audio and listen to the raw recording of the drums. And the multi-tracks for that intro clip will be available for download for free in the description below. I'll put a link in there, and you can try mixing the track yourself. That's the best way to get better at mixing. And maybe you could even go through this whole drum mixing tutorial with me with the same recording, same files. Even if you don't have the same third-party plugins as I do, catch the vibe, catch the philosophy, and catch the reason behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. So check that out. Feel free to go through the video with me. Let's dive in. I put on my headphones. All right, so let's take a listen first. See what we're working with. Okay, sounds pretty good. It's got a lot of potential in there. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll gain stage these tracks. Right now it is mainly peaking at -3, tom 1 at almost 0, kick in at -4, -3. So what I'm going to do is Shift Tab brings up this menu. I'm just going to lower the gain by like -9. That way, when I pull up plugins, I still have some headroom to do additive EQ, and I don't have to worry about internal clipping or clipping my plugins. And then another thing I'll do before I really jump in is kind of just organize my session, just so I don't have to waste mental energy when I'm looking at these files. I have very limited mental capacity, so anything to help with quick decision making. Let's go down the line. We'll listen to the kick first. So right off the bat, I already know the kick in, kick out. There's going to be frequencies where they're competing for that low end, and so we really want to prioritize one mic over the other and carve out some space for the other. So kick in, I'm really looking for the click and some top end. Kick out, I mainly want to retain the low end, so I'm going to do that with an EQ. But before that even, I will pull up an SSL channel M. I'll just slightly gate. Turn on fast attack, release. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, I like that. I like that. Go to the kick out. Okay, so obviously there's a lot more bleed. So I'm just gonna cut out all that stuff I don't need from the kick out mic. And now I will start making some EQ moves. Cut out some mud, cut some mids, and then maybe boost a little bit of high end to bring in that beater a little bit. Yeah, there's that main honk. Don't like that. Also cut some mids. And I'll just boost a little bit of the high end. And then out of the kick out, let's see what we can do. And then let's see what that sounds like. I'll lower the kick in. Never mind, I didn't like that boost there. Okay, that's a good starting point. And then I will compress. A little bit of a medium attack to let the snap through, and just enough released to retain that tail. Cool. And then after this point, I'm just gonna process the two channels together with this kick subgroup. Maybe I'll make some EQ moves there. There's still a little bit of that honk that I don't like. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is saturate it with Decapitator. Anytime we add on compressors or saturators, we just gotta pay attention to the volume jump. Just because it's louder doesn't mean it's better. Okay, that's a good starting point for me. I'm gonna leave it there. Let's move on to the snare. Let's see if there's some phase cancellation between the snare top and the snare bottom. Okay, so flipping the switch on the bottom mic definitely brought back some low end. So I'm gonna flip the switch on that. I'll lower the snare bottom by -6. Okay, do the same thing. I'll just copy that SSL plug in there. So I don't want to cut away all the tail. Start with some EQ. Gonna cut some mids, get that honk out. And this is something I like doing. I use this dynamic range, so every time the snare hits, it'll just boost that fundamental frequency a little bit. And then there's that little hum. I'm gonna get rid of that. But not too much. It's sitting very, very close to the fundamental that I don't want to touch, so I'll narrow down the Q. I like that. I like that. At this point, I am going to go to the snare submix. I want to compress both the snare top and the snare bottom. Load in the compressor. Whoopsie. Medium attack to let the transient through. And just enough release so it kind of catches that tail a little bit. And this is something I like putting on my snares. It's the Devil Lock Deluxe. I forget what exact hardware unit this was modeled after, but some old unit. I completely forgot, but someone figured out you can use it to smash and destroy your drums and they turned it into a plugin. Super nice. So I'm going to go easy on the crush, the compression. That's a cool sound. Not what I'm going for. All right, crunch. Absolutely gnarly. And I think I did a little bit too much on the low end boost, and the saturation probably brought it up a little bit. So I'm just going to do some corrective EQing after the saturation. And that's looking good. Move on to toms. I'll pan -3 and +3 for the 2 toms. I'm a drummer perspective kind of guy, so some people really don't like that, but it's just natural for me. Solo the high tom. Let's go to the low tom, and it looks like the high tom signal is a lot hotter than the low tom, so just raise the gain. Match the high tom. -3. All right, so now let's move on to some EQ moves. With toms, I like to boost a little bit of the low end straight from the E channel and cut out that low mid and maybe a little bit of a high end boost. Let's see how that sounds. I really like that. A lot of mid cut with worship stuff. Okay, I like that. Let's move on to low tom. Low tom will need a little bit more work. Again, I'll start with the boost from the low end, and I think I'm going to cut closer to 800 hertz. Around 650, 700 there. And there's a really annoying click on that low tom. Probably has more to do with my tuning. It's better if you don't have to fix it in post, but it's too late now, so. I like that. I'm going to lower the high tom by 3 decibels. And at this point, I'm going to compress a little bit. So bring that 76, good old 76. I love this thing. And I'm a little bit more aggressive on the attack on the toms for the compression. Copy that on the low tom. then on the toms subgroup, put a little decapitator action going in there, saturate it a little bit. This is a game changer. I will make one final corrective EQ move. Okay, now let's move on to the overheads. I don't want these, the slow end from the overheads to compete with my kick drum, my snare drum, my toms. So often I'll just cut out most of the low end. Let's go to where I absolutely demolish the cymbals. Yeah, that 3K is just painful. So I'm going to bring down some of that. Seems like a weird approach for mics that are supposed to capture your cymbals, but in the context of the mix, I really do like cutting out some of that high end. It keeps things buttery. And let's clamp down on those peaks. Actually, let's go somewhere that's louder. And the thing with overheads is I don't do much other than EQ, compression, and some reverb. The key with mixing your overheads is setting the level compared to the other parts of the kit. So now solo the drums and balance each element. Okay, snare bottom's a little too loud. Overall toms are a little loud. Maybe I'll actually just put a little gate on the snare bottom. Snare's a little loud. I want a little bit more of that beater, more attack on the kick drum, so I'm going to bring back in that kick in mic. And overhead, we could go down, honestly, -6. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll pull in an EQ, and then I'll Command G, and then when I pull on this side tab right here, I can just start pulling in different plugins to start making parallel processing going. So the first one I'll just label dry, and the first thing I'll do is pull in not the 1176. Something I like using for parallel compression is the Chandler limited Zener limiter. I demolish my signal on here. So I'm going to de-link the channels, and now I'm going to switch to mid side. So now this side is going to affect the mid, and this is going to affect the sides. So I'll drive the input and bring down the output. Let's go to the loud section one more time. Okay, and I'll just bring down the overall volume of the parallel compressor, -6. And I'll bring down the dry by -3. Say -9 for parallel compressor. Yeah, so with this, as I'm bringing up the sides a little bit and just demolishing the middle, it's bringing the sustain out a lot more. And we still have the nice attacks happening from the dry. And then, again, we'll saturate it. Separate layer for some saturation. I like using the HG2. Sure, there's a lot of nice stock plugin options these days for saturation. These settings are very extreme, but we are running parallel, and I'm lowering the volume on these a lot, so it's controlled chaos. Let's solo the saturation, see what's happening. And yeah, that's a sound I would rarely go for, unless it was a creative sound that I was going for. But in this case, just demolishing it and then just blending it in with the other layers. Very nice. Then I'll pull in some reverb. This is a convolution reverb, so it's modeled after real rooms using the Wood Room Large, the Convolution Reverb Pro from Ableton. And right now it's at 1.55 seconds long. We'll see how that sounds. Okay, so obviously a lot of low end happening on that reverb. So I'm just gonna EQ it out. I'll put an algorithmic reverb on there as well. -14. Mix all the way up, bring down the time. I want it lively, get some character in there. Put chorus all the way up. And then on top of that, I will pull in some additive EQ. We'll boost a little bit of that low end, a little bit of the high end, maybe cut some mids. And on top of all that compression, I will put in 2 more. I like the API 2500. That's gonna make the snare really, really thick. And having the compressor on after all that reverb, it'll also bring out those reverb tails. So it'll kind of envelop your ears into your drum sound. So that's kind of cool. And after that, compression, I'll put in a C4. It's a multi-band compressor. I'll just dial in the range to be a little bit more subtle. I don't need -7 decibels of compression. And the multiband compressor will help clamp down the low end, the low mid. So I like using that to kind of just balance out your drum sound. And lastly, put on L2 limiter just to catch those peaks. And I use the middle dial here. If you just bring down the threshold, it'll just get really, really loud. I'm not trying to make it louder. I'm trying to clamp down on those attacks. Let's see how much that's doing. Let's listen to the before and after with the old bus processor. Cool. From there, I will start to make additional EQ moves. Right now, the kick click is standing out. And I think the toms are still a little bit too loud and a little muddy. Cool. From there, I will start to sneak in some reverb on these sub mixes. So again, I will group and label dry. I just want to sneak in some reverb on my toms. Let's EQ out that reverb. I already know it's going to be very, very muddy. And I don't like what digital algorithmic reverbs do on toms with the stick clicks. So I know I'll probably have to EQ out the high end. Let's see how that sounds though. See what I'm talking about? That thing right there? I hate that. Okay, and a little too much low end. Excuse the audio. Got my dad cleaning the house downstairs. I cleaned my room yesterday. I do my job out here. He just likes to stay clean. I think the tail might be a little too long. And I'll also lower it a little bit. Let's go to the snare. It's my dry. So I will bring in something similar. We'll see how it sounds. I already know I want to bring back the high end a little bit. Yeah, I like that. A little muddy, little muddy. I want some sparkle out of that snare. Very nice. Okay, let's go to the overhead. Just gonna put it directly on the overhead. If I had recorded these drums in a big room with nice reflections, I probably wouldn't have to put a convolution reverb on here. But I'm trying to emulate a nice room, so I'm gonna put it on my overheads. And for that, I'll go wood room small. See how that sounds. Okay, now let's see how our drums are sounding. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to the drums in the context of the music. So I'm going to unmute the intro track minus the drums, and let's see how everything sounds. I still hear some of that click from the low tom coming through the music, so I'm gonna dial it in. I want a little bit more of that high tom coming through. All right, so I would say that's about 90% of the tone there. I don't spend too much time the first 90%. I actually spend most of my time in the last 10%, but that has more to do with critical listening in my car and making adjustments there. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you have any questions about anything that I just did in the computer, I know I kind of speed ran through that, but if you have any questions, corrections, suggestions, or if you have topics that you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment down below, and hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.